I have 1 o'clock. Heather, are you ready to get started?
Ready to go.
All right, great. Well, thank you everyone so much for joining us this afternoon or this morning, depending on where you are. My name is Marie LeBlanc, and I am the Director for Design at Independent Sector. And we're so excited to be partnering with Move the Needle on today's webinar. Just to tell you a little bit about who we are, Independent Sector is the only national membership organization that brings together a diverse set of nonprofits, foundations, and corporations to advance the common good. Our core areas of work are around leading on policy that impacts the charitable sector, building communities of change makers, regardless of which sector they work in across the country, and accelerating the impact and capacity of the charitable sector. Here at Independent Sector, we have been building our own internal capacity for program and product design over the past 2 years, using methodologies like human-centered design and lean impact design, which is an adaptation of the lean startup methodology. If you are familiar with our annual conference, Upswell, we did a lot of design work around that last year. We put some of those methodologies to use. So again, we're really excited about the opportunity to partner with Move the Needle to talk a little bit about some of that design work today. And we're so excited that Heather Hiscox is joining us from Tucson, Arizona. Heather is a social entrepreneur passionate about creating communities that are focused on assets, abilities, and abundance. She's the co-founder and co-director of social impact programs at Move the Needle, helping nonprofit, philanthropic, social enterprise, government, and higher education organizations educate, enable, and empower their staff to create value and innovate more effectively and efficiently. So during today's webinar, you'll be learning about the work that Move the Needle does to use lean innovation in order to eliminate waste in how we create social change. You'll learn how you can use the lean innovation principles of expose, empathy, exploration, experimentation, and evidence in your work to help your organization vet opportunities, stay relevant, and increase your impact. We are really excited for this and hope that you'll walk away understanding the importance and benefits of applying lean innovation in nonprofit and social impact organizations, that you'll gain an overview of the 5 E's of lean innovation and learn some simple ways to incorporate a focus on value creation inside of your organization. So before I turn it over to Heather to jump into all of that exciting content, I wanted to offer just a few housekeeping items. We will be taking questions at the end of today's presentation, so please use the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen to share your questions at any time throughout the webinar. And if you have additional comments or feedback, feel free to use the chat box at the bottom as well. And with that, I will turn it over to Heather.
Okay, thank you so much, Marie. We're so excited to be partnering with Independent Sector to join with you today with this webinar. And thank you for those of you that are joining live and for those of you that will watch the recording later. So we're going to talk about 5 steps to greater social impact. So this is me, as Marie mentioned, my role within Move the Needle. My background is really working in the nonprofit sector and also being a social entrepreneur, working in both nonprofit and for-profit worlds, and seeing the opportunities that exist. I'll share a story of frustration in just a moment of how we work in ways that quite don't move the needle and create the deepest impact. And so I've been always focused on changing the world. And my co-founder, Amelia Claiborne, and I, and our partner, Lauren Wisniewski, we're really focused now on how we disrupt the ways we change the world. We've really taken all of our experience and shaped this process to try to create deeper impact within organizations. So today we'll talk about how you can create value, not waste, how to apply the 5 E's. And then we have an opportunity that we'll share at the very end of the webinar where we like to offer free coaching sessions to organizations to find out where you are and how we can support you. So we'll have that at the end. So Move the Needle really exists to transform organizations, to shift their culture, to be focused on continuous innovation. And we focus on empowering people. We often do not tap the potential of the individuals that exist within our organizations. Many of you will be the troublemakers or the people asking why, or what about this, or having ideas, or being inspired about change. We want to empower those individuals across all levels of the organization to really do their best work. and it's focusing on discovering and creating new value in the eyes of customers. And we use the word customers intentionally. Some people, when we started doing this work, said, oh gosh, I don't know if that's a word we can use in the sector. But we believe that we all that do this work have an ethical obligation to discover, create, and deliver value to those we serve. And to see them as customers starts to change the conversation. So our work as Moves Needle started with for-profit enterprise. And then Amelia and I started about 4 years ago with working with social impact organizations. So now we address the needs of philanthropic organizations, foundations, cities, city government, as well as nonprofit organizations all across the country. Oh, I am hitting a blockage. There we go. So what we really see our work is doing is being innovation architects, providing the scaffolding and support for innovation to really help people change their work, to help organizations' systems start to shift, and help managers and supervisors work in whole new ways so that they mentor rather than manage innovation. So I want to tell a quick story of why I'm passionate about this work. I was working with an organization and we wanted to fight the skin cancer exposure for young children, essentially. I live in Arizona with very intense UV radiation and exposure. And we wanted to work with new parents that had just had young newborns because we were noticing around the community parents having their children in those adorable carriers with no hat, umbrella, or sun protection. And so we partnered with a lot of the local hospitals and got these cute little baby bags donated. And in the bags, we put a baby sun hat. We put a brochure that was culturally competent, translated to English and Spanish, back translated. We had our own photo session to make sure that the photos were very representative of our community and very culturally competent. We wrote a grant and we got funded from the National Foundation for this program. We won an award for the program. People loved it. And so we started disseminating these little gift bags to new parents in the maternity wards of these different hospitals. And in there was a little information card where we were measuring our metric of success of if parents would report back to us the impact of receiving the resources and the hat and all of that. And we weren't getting them back. And we were going to the hospital staff that we were working with and saying, are you handing out the bags? And they said, yeah, we've handed out like 400 of them. And we weren't seeing the response. And now in doing this work, the reason why that program probably wasn't having a huge impact is so clear. Here we were going to families who had just had a newborn, right? They're exhausted. They're trying to figure out how to breastfeed. They're looking at their partner in whole new ways, how to integrate this new baby into their existing family if they have one. It's a super chaotic time. And here we were working with a partner to say, sun safety is your number one concern, and here's your baby gift hat. It makes no sense now that we think about it because we didn't put the customer first. We didn't really understand the very best ways to communicate our message and to really reach our audience. And the hardest part about that program was that we did spend federal foundation dollars, national foundation dollars. We spent all that time and energy and passion on a product that didn't actually create value and did not prevent skin cancer for young babies and educate families in a whole new way. So we never really reached our goal. And we do this so many times. I can tell you numerous stories of the equivalent of Baby Sun Hat program and how with the very best of intentions, we create waste without creating impact. So our process is called Lean Innovation. So I'm wondering about what people think about innovation. And we talk to groups, and what we often hear is new, risky, exciting, breakthrough, a new opportunity. New is really common. But we also hear bright, shiny object syndrome, flavor of the week, flavor of the month. We've heard it all, of people being very excited about innovation and people being kind of leery and afraid of that buzzword. But essentially what innovation means to us, it's the delivery of new value in the eyes of the customer. We thought our Baby Sun Hat program was amazing and we were really excited about it, but to our customers, it made no difference. It was no impact. So it's all about how we create new value in their eyes. That's our definition of innovation, very simple. And we know that innovation flows on a continuum. There's a misconception that when you innovate, you have to burn everything to the ground. And in no way is that true. It doesn't honor the assets and ability that you already have. But if you look on the side where it says sustaining, there are some innovations that are incremental. They're small changes where you understand the problem well, you're working with an existing market or an existing group of customers or stakeholders that you've already served for a long time. And those are small changes. But when you start to drift over to the other side, you get to see more of these disruptive opportunities where you want to apply lean innovation. So these are when a project is new, or you want to go into a new community, launching new programs. Maybe the problem isn't well understood because it's one that your agency hasn't addressed in the past. Maybe the innovation is more dramatic and more radical. When you're more into that disruptive and search side, you want to use different skills and different behaviors, knowing that you're really protecting the core of the organization and continuing to optimize what you do well, but leaving room and space for innovation. That's really key. And this is what it looks like and sort of the old and new ways of working. The top triangle is an example of how we create unintentional waste with the ways that we design our work. So usually it starts with an opinion. Usually the highest paid person in the room wins. Their opinion that really reigns supreme. It generates an idea. We pitch the idea. A decision is made by that decision maker, a more powerful person. We go into planning, design, and build mode. And at the very end, we say, ta-da! And we go to our customers and cross our fingers and hope that that solution creates value for them. You can see that this can be very misguided by not talking to customers first. If we would have interviewed new parents, new families, we would have learned way different information about sun safety, where they were starting at, where they found information, what they knew about sun safety, what they needed. We would have planned a very different program. So that's the second bottom piece of those three different triangles. It's more of a stage gate approach where you start with your customers, make observations and do interviews with them. We'll talk about that as a step. The customers themselves with you help you generate ideas, which you then test before you build. So you build in pause points for learning before you move on to the next bit of growth and expansion. So that if an idea doesn't have validation, you catch it really early and you document that learning. And if it does get traction, if there is validation, you can maximize and really go slow to go fast because you have validated all of the riskiest pieces of a potential solution. What this also looks like is that top triangle is when we assume we're right. We go into execution mode. We just start building. And the second picture there, option B, is when we assume we're wrong. Often we're not rewarded within organizations to be wrong, especially the higher up we are in our agencies. We're expected to know the answer and go execute upon that. Set up, a logic model, set up a Gantt chart, your workflow, your plans, your metrics, your objectives, all of that when some of these ideas are not yet tested. So we propose that you really assume that you're wrong and don't know how best to create value and really use some testing to get to that. So it's about continuously eliminating what you don't know and following the evidence to get to answers. And with our strategic plans and with the ways that we plan our roadmaps, allowing room for learning and flexibility. So lean, you might have heard about Lean Six Sigma and all of those processes. Those work well in a known environment. That's about reducing the waste when you know about your customer problem and solution. Lean innovation is when you're in that uncertainty. You're discovering new value. It's when your customer problem or solution have uncertainty around them. And it's a combination of what Marie was talking about, some design work, design thinking with Lean Startup. It's really melding those two together into one framework that takes the best of both and incorporates them so that you deeply understand your customer, you're deeply connected, you're designing and co-creating and testing with them for rapid experimentation. So these are the 5 E's. I'm going to share a case study and then talk through each of these and give you some tips and tricks that you can apply to your work right away. So the case study I want to share was an organization that we work with. It was a coalition project, actually, that a funder had brought us in because they had funded this project for multiple years at a very large investment, and they weren't seeing the impact. They weren't seeing the result of the project. And what the program was intended to do was to work with older adults that were being released from the hospital after having a surgical procedure or after hospitalization, to provide them with some social support. These were older adults that lived alone, and they didn't have anyone to take them to pick up a prescription. They didn't have anyone to take them to a follow-up appointment or to help them grab some basic groceries so that they could stay at home and rest. They had known of that supportive network to help them. And so they created a program where they had a core of volunteers that would go do all of those activities in partnership with these patients to really help their health outcomes improve and prevent them from calling 911 or going back to the hospital and going to the ER. And so the program ran, like I said, for multiple years, and it was not getting the traction that it needed. And we'll talk about some of the assumptions and why that took place. The next piece I want to talk about just briefly before we talk about the first E, which is expose, is when we start to work with people that are not us, don't look like us, we don't represent their communities specifically, we don't live in those communities, we don't walk in their shoes. Often we apply our own lens, our privileged status, or our own life experiences on what they share with us. So when we start to do this work where we identify what we don't know, when we start to do empathy work and interview customers, it's really important that we check our own perspectives and really look at the ladder of inference or the lens with which we use to interpret their feedback. It's something that we've seen with teams to be really important from the very beginning. So the first E is all about exposing what we don't know. And how we get started with that is documenting our focus. So that example that I shared, we like to put all of our information into 3 buckets. So what's the challenge we want to focus on? So for that example, the fire department was seeing an increase in calls to 911 for people recently released from the hospital, and hospitals were readmitting patients with preventable and negative health outcomes. The second piece we'd like to focus on is the customer. Who within this challenge is impacted most? And you may have multiple customers. So in this example, customers could be case managers at the hospital. It could be the clients in the community themselves. It could be the partners they were working with. The funder could be seen as a customer. The community at large could be seen as a customer. But you want to focus when you first get started. Pick one customer on which you want to really focus on first. So the customer for this example was older adults that live alone and lack those social connections to help them after being released from the hospital. And then the third part is think about the problem from the customer's perspective. Start to hypothesize how they would talk about the challenge in their own words. So for this example, these older adults don't want to be alone and they need help, but they don't know where to turn. They don't know how to get started. So once you have these 3 pieces, it's sort of your problem statement worked through with your team or within your organization, the next step is to identify what you know for sure and what you still need to learn. And I'll break it down in the next slide. This activity is very, very powerful to do with your team. If anyone has a new idea or a new program or project they have in mind, this is the best place to start, is to say, okay, this sounds interesting. How do we really break it down into learning opportunities? How do we really examine what areas we have evidence and confidence for right now? Because we might have data, we might have experience and history, we might have a similar program. That's great. You want to write all of that down, things that really make you feel confident. And then do the converse. Really start to talk to your team and say, what do we not know? What are we unsure about? And you want to break it down into areas of uncertainty by those 3 parts of your problem statement. So about your challenge, where did this challenge come from? Where did it arise? Whose idea was it? Those are important things to ask. Have we already worked on this challenge? What has been tried in the past? What are the other areas around the challenge that I might need to be aware of? And when you think about your customer, who are they? Where can I find them? What have they already tried? What other programs or services have we already offered to them? What else is happening in the community that might impact our customer around this challenge? And then with problem, really think about how your customer would talk about it in their own words. What's an area of frustration that they're having? What's their greatest priority around this challenge? What's the history of their individual experiences in these communities around this challenge? You want to dig a little bit deeper. So with your team, we love to work with diverse teams within organizations that can contribute amazing perspectives. Really break it down about what do I need to know and what do I already know around your challenge, customer, and problem. It's a great place to start, and it gives you what you need to start to frame the next E, which is focus on empathy. So after you expose an uncertainty, you want to empathize with your customer. You want to deeply understand them. And it's all about trying to walk a mile in their shoes, experience their perspective, see what people do, not just what they say. You can use observation to do that, to watch people's actions. And when you talk to individuals, you really want to get to why. You want to understand why they're saying what they're saying, not just taking their basic statement, but getting to that deeper level so you start to get to the core. And you can do this by talking and observing. These are some tips that we have learned over time that really help for powerful interviewing. One person at a time is really important. We love to use focus groups, and we love online and paper surveys to really get a sense of people's feelings. But this is a really hard way to get empathy. Focus groups often will leave you with a more vanilla result where you're not quite sure how to make sense of every emotion or feeling or thought that people shared. And we joke that it's an introvert's nightmare and an extrovert's dream, where you start to get the loudest voice in the room dominate, and that leads to your sort of misguided takeaways. And when you do online or paper surveys, we've all had this experience. If we don't understand a question, it's hard to really get clarification. If one of the questions really stimulates thought, and we could write an essay on the number 4, we have no way to really share that deeper context or information. And we, as the person that's offering a survey, have no way to really have a conversation and get to the why behind their responses and get the clarity. So while surveys and focus groups can be a starting point, I would recommend that you add interviewing on top of that to go even deeper. You want to ask, obviously, open-ended and non-leading questions. No hypotheticals. It's really common for people to say, if I created this program, would you attend? Would you sign up? Would you become a member? And people are very polite, and they most often will say, sure, that sounds great. But we know that there's a say versus do disconnect, and some people won't follow up and follow through. So it's really important to ask people around a challenge or problem what they've done in the past, what's happened in the past, what they've tried, what worked and what didn't. You want them to tell you a story of their experience and their journey. That is the most powerful way to understand people's starting points and what they have already experimented with themselves. And from there, you can ask a lot of more detailed questions to really understand their past experience, to predict their future behavior and co-create with them. You want to listen. It's so hard to hear sometimes things you don't want to hear, or you want to pitch your solution. If you hear that you might have it, try to hold back. Ask that individual for referrals. Many people that have a problem will know people like them that they can talk to and refer you to them, and ask them if you can come back for more when you start to do the testing of your solution. And the last tip is flip the conversation. This is a way that when you work with communities that have trust issues, or people that are more introverted or more shy or reserved, it's a way to seed a conversation by saying, we've talked to individuals, and this seems to be the biggest challenge that they're running into. Do you connect with that? Do you relate to that challenge? Is that something that you have also experienced? And it gives the person an ability to really join the club and say, yeah, I have had that, and it's really rough, and they can go deeper. Or they can say, no, I don't have that, but I have this, and they can share an alternative challenge or opportunity with you. So once you do interviews, one of the biggest questions we always get asked is, how many people do I have to talk to? And you want to talk to as many people as possible so that you start to hear recurring themes. We've done interviews with up to 75 organizations, and after about organization 35, we really started hearing the same thing over and over again. So you want to talk to as many people until you can start grouping and categorizing what you're hearing. And you want to document what was surprising and why. What was really interesting about what you learned? What changed your opinion? What shifted something that you thought you knew, but you actually didn't? And what did you add to your list around some areas of uncertainty? And what was the why behind their response? What was the emotion? What were their expectations for support? What were their needs? You really want to share that with your team so that you can all share those insights and compound them together and really go deeper with how you can actually solve the problem for your customer. And what it looks like is when you do this work, you get to be the fisher person on the one side that's very successful, right? They're not throwing everything into water for every potential fish. They're really focused. They know the depth, they know the bait, and they're very successful. And this is often what we do in our programs. We try to have one-size-fits-all approaches for all of the constituents or stakeholders that we serve. And you can imagine that we need to get better at segmenting them. Even if you look at your donors, right? A brand new donor versus a major gift donor are going to be different. A board member that's highly experienced with board service in your community versus maybe a new professional. This is the first time they've been on a board. Even within your staff, you have ways that you can engage people with different value creation instead of giving everyone one size fits all. And we have seen many programs fail by trying to offer everyone the same thing because it just doesn't solve everyone's problem the same way. So the next E is focus on exploration. Once you identify opportunities for learning and you go out and you talk to customers, then you get to start to brainstorm what could really, really make a difference. This is a very exciting part. And we love brainstorming for this. And we brainstorm similarly, but we have a couple of caveats that we like to point out in bold and high impact brainstorming. You want to document everything that people say. You really want quantity over quality. Our teams will work on 40 or 50 ideas at once that they'll just brain dump and put on Post-its. And that acts as an abundant parking lot from which they can choose multiple solutions so that we aren't just working in a scarcity and saying, I have one idea, this is the one program we wrote the grant for and that we have to build. Instead, you can say, oh, there are so many ways that we could potentially create value for the stakeholder. And so you want to capture all of those. We love Post-its and Sharpies like most innovators. So try to put one idea per Post-it and really defer judgment. Make everyone feel safe within your team and give safety to yourself that you can really go big and go bold. And we say the crazier the better. We have had organizations have ideas that everyone thought, oh my goodness, no one is ever going to go for that. And with testing, it led to an amazing, amazing program that they never would have imagined in a million years. It came from a crazy idea that we then worked through, and I'll talk about that. Open access to all is very important. We've noticed a trend within social impact where usually the board of directors or executive leadership team are those that get to participate in brainstorming or offering ideas. But we know from working with multiple types of organizations in the sector that those that work in your agencies that are closest to the customers should be the ones that you include in brainstorming. They usually have amazing insights and they're never tapped because of the hierarchical structures that we keep within our organizations or because of the silos that we have across departments within our organizations. You want to engage multiple people's perspectives and a diversity of perspectives in your brainstorming and really include folks that often haven't had a voice. Once you have those amazing ideas, we can't build everything, so we want to prioritize our limited time and energy and resources. So we use a simple 2x2. Once you have those Post-its, really start to analyze them of how bold they are in the eyes of the customer, what would really knock their socks off, where if you took it to a stakeholder, they would say, whoa, that's amazing. Like no one's ever treated me with that level of respect, or I've never had that customer experience, or I've never heard of a program like that. That's amazing. You want that level of bold, and you want the level of impact that you would consider likely to solve their problem. If you have a crazy idea that seems really fun or interesting, but wouldn't actually solve the problem, that is something you're not going to want to put in your high impact category. So you really just start with an anchor point, an idea that you think is bold and high impact, and you start to lay your Post-its all around that 2x2. You can draw on a simple piece of paper. And what you want to focus on are all of those potential solutions that end up in the upper right-hand quadrant. What would really blow away your customers and what would actually solve their problem. That's where you want to focus your time and effort and have a conversation as a team where you see like, oh, well, that was a low impact idea, not very bold. We're not really going to pursue those as an agency. It kind of gives you a way to have conversations. So what you do with those solutions is you do another one of our favorite pieces, experiment. You want to test those with your customers. And at the heart of experimentation are assumptions. We make so many assumptions of what, of course, people will do and what will work and what won't, and how we should structure our programs and ideas. And often you can see there's a disaster zone. And with that case study that I shared, there were multiple assumptions that those organizations involved in that project made. And so we want to tackle those assumptions right away. Our approach is really to try to break your solution as quickly as possible before you build that giant triangle. And it's one of those stages that you pause and really analyze how you are creating value by testing. So it's really testing the say versus do of your customer. Many people will say, oh, of course I'll attend. Of course I'll participate. Yes, that program sounds amazing. But we really have to see if the customer will participate in the solution in order to receive value. So we start with writing out those assumptions. And these are the assumptions that were made in that organization. What turned out when they wrote that initial customer problem and statement that they created was they were really focused on the clients, of understanding their needs. And they were able to validate that people had a need and what the barriers were. But the customer they never included and never thought about in their testing was the case manager at the hospital. At the hospital where those patients were being discharged, that the entire program was built around those professionals telling the patient about the program, providing them with information, alerting the team at this nonprofit organization to say, oh, we have a patient that would perfectly fit your criteria and that we really think would benefit as they go home from the hospital all alone. Can we get them involved? When the project started many years prior, the CEOs of the hospitals had written letters of support. They were written into the grant and the funding proposal and request. Everyone felt as if this would be a great project. They should all be involved as a collaborative coalition. But no one had tested the work with the people that actually would do the work. And we do this so much in organizations. We hand out letters of support like candy sometimes, and it can be easy to get an approval or a joining into a proposal. But when we get down to the real work, it just falls apart. And so what they found was that the program really stopped at the case managers. And once they did empathy with case managers, they understood that case managers have a high degree of turnover, that their positions are very, very stressful. They have to really get people out of beds as quickly as possible and back into the community to make room for more patients. They're incentivized with some of the structures within the healthcare system to do that. And with the turnover and with the fast pace of their work, many of them, when we tested with them with some experiments, they had never heard of the program. They had no information about the program. You can see these assumptions below. Because they didn't know the enrollment criteria, they couldn't even identify patients that might have really benefited. So they could not refer patients to the program. They didn't have what they needed. They didn't have the time and space to do that in their work or the knowledge. And they also were not able to share it with their colleagues. Even the case manager supervisors weren't able to share it with new hires because there had been no setup to really prepare the next set of case managers as they were hired. And so the program slowly dissolved. And unfortunately, again, this organization and this coalition created a large triangle of waste based on assumptions that no one actually tested. So when you identify those areas of uncertainty, you talk to your customers, you start to brainstorm those solutions, and when you go to test them, it's really, really key to identify all the things that you are assuming that your stakeholders will do to make your program a success, because unfortunately they were alone older adults that never got the services or care that they really could have taken advantage of. So when you brainstorm all of those assumptions, we have another quick 2x2 to really prioritize your time. You want to look for those assumptions that are most crucial, most make or break. If this is not true, the whole program will fall apart. And many of those assumptions are time ordered. If we can't even get them to share knowledge that they even know about the program, how will they refer people? We have to test that first. If you have to test buy-in of the hospital administration, you have to do early testing of those assumptions. So which assumptions are most crucial and which are most unknown? Which are those that you really don't know the answer? If you know something about the assumption you're making, you have some data or experience, you can put that more on the known, but you want to spend a little bit less time on that, obviously. And if it's less crucial, you don't want to focus on that first. You really want to get to the make or break pieces of your solution first. And how you do that is by designing an experiment. And the components of an experiment are pretty basic. What's the behavior you need to see? So when they went to case managers and said, can you share with me information about the program? And case managers said, no, I can't. Can you show me the enrollment criteria or the brochure that we have shared and should be at your workstation? And they couldn't find it. Those are quick experiments and tests that were very predictive to the outcome, the negative outcome of that program. So you want to have a behavior that's really key that you need to see your customer exhibit to know that your solution will actually work. We worked with other agencies to design other experiments. Some examples were in fundraising. We had a group that wanted to have a house party for donors, and they wanted to create this really great party kit. And in the party kit would be swag and educational brochures and information they could hand out at the party. And we said, well, let's really test this before we jump in with both feet and creating this great kit. Let's really go to our donors that we think in a heartbeat would absolutely host a house party and that have said, I want to host a house party. Let's make a short list of those individuals and let's go to them and say, okay, we have a kit, but there is an investment, right? We have to have a hurdle for them to overcome, and it has to be an exchange of what we call currency. They have to give something of value to themselves to show that they're all in this solution. So we said they have to give a certain dollar amount to purchase the kit because it was expensive to put together. And they had to give us the date and time of their house party. So what that does is it makes the potential customer pull out their calendar and really see, what Friday or Saturday night they wanted to have a house party. And so this individual within this agency came up with a list of 20 individuals, launched a basic email as an experiment, asking people to sign up for the date and to make a deposit for the party kit. And none of them did it, not a single one out of the 20. And these were the most beloved donors that he had envisioned. And he was able to go back and do more empathy and say, why not? Can you let me know why this wasn't an exciting opportunity or enticing to you? And what he heard were people were saying, now that I looked at it, I don't really have time to host a party. I'm traveling a lot, whatever it was. I realize I feel awkward asking my friends for money. I don't know if I should really go about doing that, or maybe I don't have budget for catering, or I don't have a house large enough to host my friends and family to do this work, to have a house party. And so it was very interesting to them to reinforce that they're glad they didn't invest all the time and money building the kit, and that there might be a certain segment of donors that were better to target for house parties, people with excess wealth, excess time, space to hold a party, and were very well skilled and experienced and comfortable with asking their friends for money. Those would be a much better target for a program like that. So in that experimental design that I've described with the case managers and with potential donors, the house party hosts, there was a behavior that they wanted to see. There was a target metric. Out of those 20 individuals, we wanted to see more than 50%. We wanted to see about 14 or 15 out of 20 be really excited about the party and the kit for us to really, create this infrastructure, create the kit and do all of that work. So the piece of the experiment of what will you do? How will you initiate the experiment? How will you reach out to customers? So for them, it was an email. And for the other group, it was going to hospital staff physically and talking with them and asking for these resources. And you can wrap that into a hypothesis. If I go to the hospital floor and I ask someone to show me the enrollment criteria for our program, will 20%, or not 20, sorry, 80%, will 80% of those case managers be able to do that? Will they be able to show me? If I email them about the party kit, will majority of them buy the kit and set up the time and date for their party? And so it's all about wrapping it into a hypothesis and marking down the learning, really documenting as a team and as an organization what you're testing and what you're trying so you can build upon that knowledge. And the last piece is evidence. After you run these experiments, you want to take the data, the actual results, 0 out of 20, and you want to pull out the insights, the why behind it. Many people think that empathy in design starts in the beginning and then it goes away, but you should always be having conversations that are empathy focused during experimentation. You want to understand why you got the result that you got, why people said, yes, this is amazing. You want to know why. Let's say the party kit got 18 out of 20 purchases. We want to talk to those people and say, wow, why was this such a hit? Why was this so exciting to you? So we can build upon that in our messaging and marketing our future party kits. Or if they say no, we got to why, and we got to understand it to inform our decision-making in the future. And this helps us have more power within our organizations. If we are working on a team or individually where we normally don't have the strongest voice in our organization, we can use evidence to really give support. So if you have a leader that says, well, I don't like that idea. Okay, it's more than that, right? We can actually provide evidence and support why we should or should not build certain programs or projects. So we make a decision based on the evidence that we get. We can persevere and move on to that next risky assumption, because we'll have more in our chart there, our 2x2. We want to keep checking those off to learn more. We might need to iterate. Maybe something about our experiment went a little bit sideways. Maybe it was the wrong time of the day and we had a bad turnout for testing. Maybe some of our emails bounced back or our messaging was a little off. We can tweak and rerun an experiment. Or we might want to pivot. We might get a very clear signal, like the party kit, that was not the strategy. Like the baby sun hat program, that was not the strategy. We definitely needed to pivot and better understand our customer, better understand the problem we solve for them, and what the potential solution would actually be. So it's a very iterative process. That's why you get that sort of messy search picture that I showed versus that linear execution picture where you assume you're right versus wrong. When you're on this learning journey, it does lead to places that you didn't expect, and you do have to kind of go back and recircle to learn more to create deepest impact. So you do multiple experiments over time. You document that journey, you learn quickly, and the more validation you get, the more confidence you have in making a financial request internally, drafting your next grant proposal, talking to a donor one-on-one, influencing your board and leadership and decision makers, and crafting your program as a team. It's part of that going slow to go fast that I referred to earlier. Once you have a solution that works, I just want to introduce you briefly to what we call the value stream discovery. It's a process, 7 steps, where you have a solution that you want to make sure is continually creating value. And how people enter that experience is just with basic awareness. And then they move through these 7 stages. Once they're aware of your program or service, they become intrigued. They might be trusting, exchange some contact information, and then we get them to convinced, which is when some sort of currency changes hands. It's when they pay money, they make a gift, they attend a program, they enroll in a service. But after that, often in the sector, we leave people hanging. We say, oh, yay, we got 150 people come to the gala. All right. Then we need to do more work, right? We need to help them when they're in that hopeful stage. That's when all of those individuals that have exchanged something of value with us are sitting and hoping that they made the right choice, that was a good use of time or resources or energy. And we all do this as consumers of experiences or products or services, right? We all go, wow, was that a good concert? Was that a good event? Was that a good investment? We want to see the immediate return. And in that hopeful stage is where you get, quick thank you letters that go out, calls from your board, immediate response, because the next goal is to get people to satisfied. We want to make sure that they are satisfied with their experience, that we delivered upon our promise, that we solved a problem for them, and then we want to go a step further. We want to get them to passion. We really want to make sure that that stakeholder, whether it's a client that pays nothing for our services, a board member that has been involved with your agency, we want to make sure that they're passionate, that they would say, oh my goodness, I love this organization. Let me tell you why. Because those people will tell others, and they fill that funnel. They fill that awareness. And what's so powerful about understanding how a program works and how to move people through this journey is that we can have activities that we do at each of these stages to move people forward, and we can have metrics to measure to what extent we're achieving our goals. And we can identify bottlenecks. If we get most people to trusting, but we can't get people to attend or buy or invest, We know that there's an issue with our messaging, our materials, the ways that we're communicating, our program design, and the way that we solve problems. We can really have different pause points to go deeper. We often forget this step within the sector. A next piece I want to just quickly mention is for any of you that are listening that are in leadership roles within your organization, there's a difference between managing innovation and mentoring innovation. It's very important. When you're in the unknown, you need to give teams space to expose their assumptions, and you want to ask them for evidence. You want to support their learning journey. That's really what you're there to optimize. And you're there to really measure the impact. So if you have a bold idea that has a lot of uncertainty, that's the mode at which you want to work. When you're in a known environment and you're making smaller incremental changes, that's when you're really trying to optimize execution, and you want to measure performance to those tasks. That's saying, you know, we're going to make these shifts, we're going to measure how well you do this work as a staff member, and we'll measure the impact of that. But to prematurely hold your teams accountable for new ideas or projects or services that are not validated, that have a lot of uncertainty, is really unfair. And you're putting execution metrics on a project or service that's actually very highly searched. So it's really important to be clear in leadership roles when you're holding staff accountable, whether your projects are search versus execution. You can also apply this to your strategic plan. We've had executive leadership teams take their strategic plan and break it into search versus execution so that they can engage their teams and reward them differently. So they can see where there might be small changes and which are big, bold splashes that they really need to address in different ways. And I'll leave you with some questions that you can ask. Innovative ways of working on the purple side versus business as usual. So typically we'll ask questions like, do I like this idea? How can it scale? What's the ROI? How does it fit within our existing strategic plan? When will it launch? Why is the sample size so small? Some people think that with an innovation, you have to achieve statistical significance, and you really just have to achieve learning and talk to as many people as you can to really get that strong signal. Or they're asked about, don't we already have funding, right? Didn't we already write that national grant and we have to build the program? Oh my. Instead, you want to ask different questions, and different questions can drive different behaviors. So you want to ask questions like, who is the customer? Who are we even trying to solve our problem for? What's the insight that we learn from customers from talking with them one-on-one that led to this idea or decision? What's the riskiest assumption? What are we thinking will happen, but we actually don't know if it'll work or not? What's the currency we can use to test behavior with our customers to know whether or not we should invest in this solution? What's the evidence that this will actually solve customers' problems? And then documenting what have we learned and what do we need to learn next? Those are just excellent questions to ask if you want to really engender a learning organization and capture your learning journey. These are the ways that you can start to shift behavior within your organization. And we like to not talk about competition within the sector, but our sector is highly competitive. There are limited resources. So learning how to translate insight into action quickly is really the ultimate competitive advantage for an organization. There's no evidence that life is going to slow down. It's going to continue to speed up. There will be continuous change. So how do you work most effectively in uncertainty will actually help your organization thrive and stay relevant and create deeper impact? It's really important to take on those skills. And what I mentioned was we would love to hear from you. We talk to individuals all over the world actually to find out what their deepest needs are, what they're hitting, where they could use some mentoring support, where they want some guidance. We would love to hear about your challenge. So we want to offer you a 30-minute free coaching session. All you have to do is email us at socialimpact@movestheneedle.com, and we will get in touch with you and set that up. So I would love to pause and hear what your greatest questions and insights might be from what we've talked about so far.
Great. Hi, Heather. Thank you so much. A couple of questions have come in, but please feel free if you have additional questions, go ahead, type them in, and I'm going to start shooting some to Heather. So the first question is on one of the 2x2s that you showed kind of in the middle of the presentation, about distinguishing those two spectrum a little bit more, and the user or the person who asked this kind of wanted to get a better understanding of whether something that is viewed as breakthrough by the customer would also be high impact, or if you might have some examples of bold ideas that aren't high impact. Just trying to understand how you use that tool a bit better.
Yes, absolutely. That's a great question. So bold is what that axis is all about, is bold in the eyes of the customer. What would they see as breakthrough? So that's correct what you were saying. Would they be really like, wow, an example would be people that go to social service agencies often have to go to multiple agencies. They might have to go to DES, and they might need to go to a food bank, and they might need to go to another agency. And a breakthrough idea could be a one-stop. And some communities are doing this, where it might be a one-stop agency that in an hour-and-a-half long appointment, they can get registered for Section 8 housing. They can sign up for affordable health care. They can sign up for mental health support, let's say. They can get a food box. They can do one thing at once. That would be an example of something that would just go, wow, thank you, amazing. You just saved me so much time and energy. This was so efficient and such a great experience, let's say. That would be an example of a bold idea in the eyes of the customer, because many communities are not doing that. High impact that's another example of high impact. That would solve a lot of problems, potentially. That's an assumption that would have to be tested for that individual. So the high impact piece is, does it actually solve a problem? Let's say, for example, we worked with a community college, and they wanted to work on their academic advising system. And students were saying, we want 24-hour access to academic advisors. We, at 11 p.m., if we think of an idea, we're used to hopping on a chat box to talk to our Netflix people, or like our cell phone. We want this for academic advising. And so the school said, okay, we'll set up this, we use FaceTime as the experiment, sort of a minimum viable product to test that. And we went out to students, and it was bold. They thought, wow, like I can have access whenever I want with an advisor, and I can talk to them, online. That's cool. It could seem bold in their mind. But what was fascinating is when we tested it, students, when they got on FaceTime, they were really giggly and felt super uncomfortable. And they realized that they usually use FaceTime with their partner or family or friends. They weren't using it with an academic advisor. So it turned out that idea was actually pretty low impact. It didn't solve the problem of advising, because the technology and the way that they were trying to provide it was bold, but it didn't actually work. So things that we assume, even on our 2x2, we have to test with those experiments, and that's why we do that. So that seemed like a bold and high impact solution, but with testing, we learn otherwise. And so the bold is in the eyes of the customer, and what we think will be impactful, what we think will actually solve the problem from what we've heard from them, and then we test it with running an experiment.
That's great. So speaking of experiments, great segue into another question that someone asked, coming from the perspective of a small nonprofit. And the question is, small nonprofits are eager to learn, but often feel strained just to continue doing the work that they're doing, much less experiment on new ideas. So do you have any advice on experimenting in smaller shops?
Yes. And that is such a great question. We know that in enterprise or other examples of innovation, they have entire innovation campuses and teams, and people work like 40 hours a week on innovation. That does not exist anywhere with our city clients or with our nonprofit clients. We ask that people dedicate 3 hours a week when they work through our accelerator program, and teams can make significant progress in small little chunks. There's ways to incorporate this way of working all throughout your day. For example, with empathy, just to take a step talking about that, we've had organizations add 3 empathy questions to their intake call list. So whatever questions they ask people when they call an agency, they add a couple empathy questions. Or if there's a service provider that they interact with, you can add it in small ways, and then just have like a Google Doc that your team can start to enter that data, and then you can start to analyze and see themes that way. And that's a very quick way to start using the approach. With testing and experimentation, you can also do this really quickly. That party box, it probably took him 15 minutes to draft the email. He had to export names of those donors and attach them to the email. The whole thing, from our initial conversation where we designed the experiment to this individual running the experiment probably took less than an hour. And he just monitored the emails coming back. So it's just a different way of thinking of how can I engage with my customer quickly and easily and authentically, right, in a way that's respectful, but I can integrate it into the work that I do. So you want to look for opportunities when you're already with customers to ask different questions. And when you have a program or idea, to find those quick, simple ways to test that risky behavior. You can easily do some of these experiments. Most of our teams during our boot camp only have about an hour and 15 minutes to run experiments. And they usually can walk away with deep insights. So it sounds bigger than it needs to be. It can be pretty simple.
Yeah, I would just say from our experience that something that we've learned here at Independent Sector, that actually trying to take some of the pressure off of even building the perfect experiment and really focusing on what you're trying to learn has been a learning curve for us, but has helped us try and think about running experiments more creatively, more quickly, and with less resource investment. So.
Yes, exactly. It can be done, I promise.
So another question that's come in is from some of our viewers that may not be in a leadership position in their organization, but are really interested in trying to initiate some lean innovation in their organization. Do you have any advice on how staff in that type of position can get buy-in and start to run some of these techniques, knowing that there may be limited time and resources, and they may not have the same type of control over their team's time and resources?
Yes, absolutely. That's such a good question. There are two different things I would say. The first is if you have leadership that are very old style, sort of command and control, they might be more closed-minded. They really like that power of decision making. Sometimes you want to gain empathy from them. You can use empathy. Anytime that there's a conflict or a disconnect, there's always an opportunity for empathy. There's something where you need to figure out where you need to meet them. What are their priorities? What are their fears? What are their stresses? What are their challenges? Because you want to meet them where they are by offering them support to understand how they view the world. You want to walk in their shoes. You want to see them as a customer, because in order to get them on board, you have to create value for them. So I would start there, can be one place to start. The other piece to think about is what we just talked about, was doing the small little bits of empathy and experimentation and sharing that. Most of our leaders, even in the social impact sector, start to get farther and farther away from those they serve with their role, because they go to different types of meetings and they do different types of work. They're pretty far from frontline staff and activities. So if you, as an innovator within your organization, an entrepreneur, can start to do those interviews, start to ask those questions that you add when you interact with customers, and start to feed that back to leaders to say, you know, I've had the opportunity to talk to 25 people that are enrolled in this program, and this is what I'm hearing is one of their biggest pain points. I don't know if we're really solving that with our solution. You can be the one to start to plant those seeds. And we have seen that work very well, actually, where leaders go, oh, wow, like, thanks for taking the initiative to do that. Like, that's a really interesting strategy that you use. And those questions are really informative. Thank you. And like, it can actually elevate people within the organization. And then when you go to testing, if you're doing experiments that are, you know, you don't break the law, and you acknowledge organizational values and what expected values would be, you can provide that evidence and data of saying, you know, I had this idea for the party kit, I tested it, and this is what I learned. When you feed them that knowledge as well, they often, again, don't have access to experimentation. They don't even know frameworks like these most often. When you can provide value to them of that learning with a recommendation that's evidence informed, it really can go a long way. So organizations that start to work this way, we tell them, like, start small and start to get those small wins and train up to leaders with evidence to start to help them see the impact and what could be possible. That's the best place to get started.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. I think that takes us right up about to 2 o'clock.
Perfect.
Just a minute or two left. So I'll just say from our end, a couple people have asked about whether the presentation will be available. It is being recorded, and we will share the recording with everyone after this event. And we're also, in the spirit of gathering our own input and user data, have a short survey that we'd love to get your feedback on just following the webinar. So that should pop up on your screen. right when you close out. And I'll say thank you again for participating and turn it over to Heather for a last word.
Thank you so much, everyone. We know that this work is not easy. We have walked in your shoes. We have written those grants. We planned the gala. We've designed those programs. We've worked in organizations with, we always joke, 5 minutes and $5 and 5 team members. We know how it feels, and we are here to support you. Seriously, reach out. Email us at socialimpact@movesneedle.com. We would love to support you and see what challenges you're working through. And thank you so much for giving your precious time to learning about our approach and spending time with us. And thank you, Independent Sector, for being a great partner and for hosting us for the webinar.
Likewise, thank you, Heather, and your team, and we'll look forward to seeing everyone online soon. Thanks so much.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great day. Bye-bye.